The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted the scope on her rifle for the third time. Her hands were steady, despite the weight of 100 pairs of eyes watching her every move from behind the observation line. She had been shooting since she was 8 years old, learning from her grandfather who had served 3 tours in Vietnam. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. General Harrison Matthews stood 20 feet behind her, his weathered face set in a permanent scowl that had intimidated recruits for over 30 years. At 58, he was old-school military, the kind of commander who believed that certain roles in the army were better suited for certain types of people. In his mind, precision shooting under extreme pressure was a man's domain, and no amount of political correctness was going to change his opinion. The target stood 800 meters away, barely visible to the naked eye. It wasn't just any target. It was a playing card, the ace of spades, pinned to a wooden board. The card measured just 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And Maria was expected to hit the center pip with a single shot, in a slight crosswind. With her career on the line, the whole situation had started 3 weeks earlier during a routine training exercise. Maria had been performing exceptionally well in all areas of her military training, consistently outscoring her male counterparts in marksmanship, tactical awareness, and physical fitness. She had graduated top of her class from sniper school and had been recommended for an elite special operations unit. Everything was progressing smoothly until General Matthews arrived for his monthly inspection. Captain Stevens, Maria's commanding officer, had been showing the general around the training facilities when they stopped at the shooting range. Maria was in the middle of a long-distance accuracy test, and she had just placed 5 consecutive shots within a 2-inch grouping at 600 meters. The other soldiers gathered around were impressed, offering congratulations and friendly competition. General Matthews watched silently as Maria completed her exercise, his expression unreadable. When Captain Stevens enthusiastically introduced Maria as their most promising sniper candidate, the general's response was curt and dismissive. He questioned whether the standards had been lowered, whether the tests were rigorous enough, and whether Maria could perform under real pressure rather than controlled training conditions. The tension in the air was palpable as Maria overheard the conversation. She had faced skepticism before, being one of only 12 women in a training program of 200 men, but never from someone with the power to derail her military career entirely. General Matthews had the authority to remove her from the special operations track with a single recommendation, and his reputation for traditional views was well known throughout the base. Captain Stevens, a fair and progressive officer who had seen Maria's capabilities firsthand, defended her performance statistics. He pulled out her training records, showing consistent excellence across all metrics. Maria had scored 98% on her written exams, completed the obstacle course faster than 85% of her male colleagues, and maintained the highest accuracy rating in the unit for 3 consecutive months. But General Matthews remained unconvinced. He argued that training scores meant nothing in real combat situations, where psychological pressure, environmental factors, and split-second decision-making could separate life from death. He suggested that Maria might crumble when faced with true adversity, that her excellent training performance might be the result of a controlled environment rather than genuine skill. The conversation grew heated as other soldiers began to gather around, sensing the conflict. Some supported Maria quietly, having witnessed her abilities during joint exercises. Others remained neutral, unwilling to challenge a general's opinion publicly. A few nodded in agreement with Matthews, sharing his skepticism about women in combat roles. Maria herself remained at her shooting position, trying to focus on her breathing exercises, while listening to her future being debated 50 feet away. She had worked incredibly hard to reach this point, sacrificing social opportunities, pushing through physical exhaustion, and proving herself repeatedly in a male-dominated environment. The thought of having it all dismissed because of one person's prejudice filled her with a mixture of anger and determination. The situation reached a breaking point when General Matthews made a comment about political correctness lowering military standards to accommodate diversity quotas. Captain Stevens, his own military bearing keeping him respectful but firm, challenged the general to test Maria under the most extreme conditions he could devise. If she failed, Matthews could remove her from the program with Stevens's full support. If she succeeded, the general would personally recommend her for immediate advancement to the Special Operations Unit. General Matthews paused, considering the proposal. His decades of military experience had taught him to be confident in his judgments, and he genuinely believed that Maria would crumble under sufficient pressure. He saw an opportunity to prove his point definitively while maintaining his authority. After a moment of calculation, he agreed to the challenge, but with his own conditions. The terms he proposed were deliberately extreme. The shot would be taken at 800 meters, significantly longer than standard training distances. The target would be a single playing card rather than a conventional bullseye. The shooting would take place during the windiest time of day, when cross-currents made accuracy nearly impossible. Maria would have only one shot, no practice rounds, and no wind flags to gauge conditions. Most importantly, the general added a personal stake to the challenge. If Maria made the shot, he would not only recommend her for special operations, but would also personally commend her actions in his official report to the Pentagon. However, if she missed, she would be immediately transferred to a desk job and removed from all field training programs permanently. The gallery of soldiers fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about Maria's entire military future. Captain Stevens looked concerned, realizing that the stakes had escalated beyond what he had intended. He started to object to the harsh consequences, but Maria stepped forward before he could speak. Her voice was calm and steady as she accepted the challenge. She knew the risks, understood the pressure, and recognized that this moment would define not just her own career, but potentially the opportunities available to other women who might follow in her footsteps. The weight of representation added another layer of pressure, but it also strengthened her resolve. General Matthews smiled grimly, certain that he had created conditions under which failure was inevitable. He had seen many excellent shooters miss much easier shots under far less pressure. The combination of distance, target size, weather conditions, and psychological pressure would surely overwhelm even the most skilled marksman, let alone a young woman trying to prove herself in a man's world. Word of the challenge spread quickly throughout the base. By the time the shooting was scheduled for the following morning, nearly 300 soldiers had requested permission to observe. The base commander, Colonel Williams, initially considered making the event private to avoid turning it into a spectacle, but ultimately decided that the outcome would have broader implications for military policy and should be witnessed by the entire unit. That evening, Maria spent hours in preparation, but not in the way most people expected. Rather than obsessing over technical aspects of the shot, she focused on mental conditioning and stress management techniques her grandfather had taught her. She meditated, visualized the perfect shot sequence, and reminded herself of all the successful shots she had made under pressure in the past. She also spent time researching General Matthews, trying to understand his perspective and background. She learned that he had served with distinction in 3 combat deployments, and had earned his position through exceptional leadership and tactical skill. His skepticism wasn't rooted in malice but in genuine concern for military effectiveness and unit cohesion. Understanding this helped her approach the challenge with respect rather than resentment. As the sun set over Fort Braxton, Maria Rodriguez prepared for what would either be the shot that launched her military career into the stratosphere, or the moment that ended it before it truly began. The ace of spades waiting for her 800 meters away represented more than just a target. It was a symbol of everything she had worked toward, and everything she stood to lose. The base fell quiet that night, but sleep came to few. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning that everyone sensed would be remembered for years to come. Regardless of the outcome, dawn broke gray and windy over Fort Braxton, with clouds moving swiftly across the sky and tree branches swaying in rhythmic patterns that made experienced shooters nervous. Maria Rodriguez had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not from anxiety but from a habit ingrained during her childhood in rural Texas, where she had learned that the early morning hours were when the best hunters made their most important decisions. She sat in the base mess hall with a simple breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee, ignoring the whispered conversations and stolen glances from soldiers at nearby tables. News of the challenge had spread beyond the base boundaries overnight. and she could see personnel from other units who had arrived early to witness what many were calling the most significant shooting demonstration in Fort Braxton's history. Captain Stevens approached her table with obvious concern etched on his face. He had spent most of the night reviewing regulations and protocols, looking for a way to modify the terms of the challenge, or at least reduce the consequences of failure. His research had been fruitless. General Matthews had structured the agreement perfectly within military guidelines, leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. The captain sat down across from Maria and spoke in low tones about the meteorological report. The wind speed was fluctuating between 15 and 22 miles per hour, with gusts reaching up to 30. The direction was shifting every few minutes, making it nearly impossible to compensate accurately. Weather conditions that would challenge even the most experienced military snipers in combat situations. Maria listened politely but had already gathered this information herself during her pre-dawn reconnaissance of the shooting range. She had spent 45 minutes observing wind patterns, noting how the distant trees moved, studying the way dust and leaves behaved at various distances from the firing line. Her grandfather had taught her that understanding environmental conditions was more important than understanding the mechanics of shooting. Her grandfather, Sergeant First Class Eduardo Rodriguez, had been her introduction to both military service and precision shooting. After returning from Vietnam with a Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts, he had settled on a small ranch outside San Antonio, where he raised cattle and trained local law enforcement in marksmanship. Maria had spent every summer of her childhood learning not just how to shoot, but how to think like a marksman. Eduardo had never treated Maria differently because she was a girl. When she was 10 years old and struggling with the recoil of his old hunting rifle, he had simply adjusted her stance and grip until she could handle the weapon effectively. When she expressed frustration at missing targets that her male cousins hit easily, he had explained that precision shooting was about patience and consistency rather than strength or aggression. The lessons had extended far beyond marksmanship. Eduardo had taught Maria about mental discipline, about maintaining focus under pressure, and about the responsibility that came with the ability to place a bullet exactly where you intended it to go. He had shared stories of soldiers who had saved lives with impossible shots, and others who had failed when their skills were most needed. Most importantly, he had taught her that shooting under pressure was different from shooting for sport or practice. When lives depended on your accuracy, when failure meant consequences beyond missing a target, the mental game became more important than technical skill. Eduardo had created increasingly stressful training scenarios, having Maria shoot while he shouted distracting commands, while firecrackers exploded nearby, while she was physically exhausted from running. These lessons served Maria well during her military training, where she had faced skepticism and challenges from day one. Being one of 12 women in a predominantly male training program had required constant proof of her capabilities. Some of her fellow soldiers had accepted her based on performance, others had remained skeptical regardless of her achievements, and a few had actively hoped for her failure. The psychological pressure of representation had been the most difficult aspect of her military experience. Maria understood that her success or failure would influence opinions about women in combat roles for years to come. Every missed shot was analyzed more critically. Every mistake was magnified, and every achievement was sometimes dismissed as an exception rather than evidence of capability. But this pressure had also forged her into a more complete soldier. She had learned to perform consistently despite hostile audiences, to maintain concentration while being questioned and challenged, and to exceed standards rather than merely meet them. Her training scores reflected not just natural talent but the resilience developed through constant scrutiny. At 7:30, Maria made her way to the armory to select her rifle and ammunition. She had been given permission to choose from several high-precision weapons, including custom-built sniper rifles worth more than most soldiers' annual salaries. After careful examination, she selected a rifle she had trained with extensively, prioritizing familiarity over theoretical performance advantages. The ammunition selection was equally critical. She chose rounds from a batch she had personally tested for consistency, ensuring that each bullet had identical weight and ballistic characteristics. She examined each round individually, checking for microscopic imperfections that could affect trajectory over 800 meters. General Matthews arrived at the shooting range precisely at 8 o'clock, accompanied by his aide-de-camp and several high-ranking officers from regional commands. Word of the challenge had reached the Pentagon overnight, and there were rumors that the outcome would influence upcoming policy decisions about women in special operations roles. The general's demeanor remained stern and confident as he surveyed the assembled crowd of nearly 400 soldiers, base personnel, and visiting officers. He had experienced similar challenges throughout his career and had never seen pressure fail to expose weaknesses in soldiers who appeared strong under normal circumstances. The wind conditions and target size virtually guaranteed failure, confirming his belief that this exercise would settle the debate definitively. Colonel Williams, the base commander, had spent the morning ensuring that proper protocols were followed and that the challenge remained within appropriate military guidelines. He had also arranged for official documentation of the event, including video recording and range measurements verified by multiple sources. Whatever the outcome, there would be no questions about the validity of the results. At 8:15, Maria appeared at the shooting line, carrying her selected rifle and wearing standard military fatigues. She had chosen not to use specialized shooting gear, wanting to demonstrate capabilities that could be replicated under field conditions. Her equipment was identical to what any soldier might carry during actual combat operations. The preparation phase began with range verification and target placement. Military engineers had precisely measured the distance to confirm it was exactly 800 meters. The playing card, a standard ace of spades, had been mounted on a wooden backing and positioned to present the maximum challenge. The center pip that Maria needed to hit measured less than half an inch in diameter. As technical preparations continued, more personnel continued arriving from neighboring bases and military installations. The gathering had taken on the atmosphere of a significant military event, with formal observation protocols and official documentation procedures that elevated it far beyond a simple training exercise. General Matthews took the opportunity to speak with several junior officers, reinforcing his perspective on military standards and the importance of maintaining appropriate roles for different personnel. His comments were diplomatic but clear. He believed this challenge would demonstrate the limitations of current diversity initiatives and support more traditional approaches to special operations assignments. Maria used the preparation time to continue observing environmental conditions. The wind patterns had become slightly more predictable as the morning progressed, but remained challenging. She noted the movement of grass at various distances, the behavior of flags and banners around the base, and the way heat signatures affected visibility at maximum range. At 8:45, all technical preparations were complete. The rifle had been checked and certified, ammunition had been inspected and approved, and measuring equipment had verified all distances and target specifications. Official observers had taken positions to ensure clear sight lines and accurate assessment of results. The moment of truth was approaching, and the tension among the assembled crowd had become almost tangible. Conversations had quieted to whispers, with hundreds of people focusing their attention on a young woman who was about to attempt something that would be difficult for anyone under ideal conditions, let alone under the pressure of career-defining consequences. Maria Rodriguez stepped up to the firing line, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just her own future, but potentially influence military policy for generations of women who might follow in her footsteps. Maria Rodriguez settled into her shooting position with the fluid precision of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times before. The rifle felt natural in her hands, its weight distributed perfectly across her body as she adjusted the bipod legs and found her optimal sight picture. Around her, 400 people held their collective breath. But in her mind, the world had narrowed to just herself, her weapon, and a playing card 800 meters away. The wind had stabilized somewhat, though it remained challenging. Maria could feel it against her left cheek, carrying the scent of morning grass and the distant aroma of coffee from the base cafeteria. She had learned to read wind not just visually but through all her senses. The way it sounded as it moved through different structures, the way it felt against exposed skin, and the way it affected her breathing rhythm. General Matthews stood directly behind her, close enough that she could hear his steady breathing and the slight creak of his leather boots as he shifted his weight. His confidence remained absolute. In his 30-year career, he had seen countless soldiers fail under far less pressure than this moment demanded. The combination of distance, target size, environmental conditions, and psychological pressure created a scenario where failure was not just likely but virtually certain. Through her scope, Maria could see the ace of spades clearly, though it appeared smaller than a postage stamp at this distance. The center pip that she needed to hit was barely visible, even with maximum magnification. The wooden backing board showed slight movement in the wind, adding another variable to an already complex equation. Captain Stevens watched from the observation line. His hands clenched unconsciously as he witnessed his most promising soldier face a challenge that could end her military career in the next 30 seconds. He had reviewed every aspect of Maria's training record the previous evening, looking for any indication of how she might perform under this level of pressure. Her scores were excellent, but scores meant nothing now. The assembled crowd included soldiers from across the southeastern military district, with some having driven through the night to witness what many believed would be a historic moment. Conversations had ceased entirely, leaving only the sound of wind moving through the trees and the distant noise of routine base operations continuing in other areas. Maria's breathing settled into the rhythm her grandfather had taught her years ago. 4 counts in, hold for 2. 6 counts out, hold for 2. The pattern slowed her heart rate and steadied her nervous system while maintaining optimal oxygen levels for cognitive function. Eduardo had explained that breathing was the foundation of everything else. If you could control your breathing under pressure, you could control your mind. She began her final target acquisition sequence, making microscopic adjustments to account for the current wind conditions. The crosshairs moved almost imperceptibly as she compensated for the bullet's trajectory over 800 meters of flight time. At this distance, factors that would be irrelevant at shorter ranges became critical. The Earth's rotation, air density, temperature variations, and even the rifle's minute mechanical tolerances. The mathematical calculations required for this shot were staggering. The bullet would lose approximately 60% of its muzzle velocity during flight, dropping nearly 15 feet due to gravity, and drifting several inches due to wind resistance. Maria's mind processed these variables automatically, drawing on years of training and thousands of practice rounds to make intuitive adjustments that would have taken computers minutes to calculate precisely. General Matthews checked his watch. Military protocol required that the shot be taken within a reasonable time frame, preventing shooters from waiting indefinitely for perfect conditions. Maria had been in position for 2 minutes, well within acceptable parameters, but the pressure of time was another factor designed to increase difficulty. At 900 hours exactly, Maria made her final sight adjustment. The crosshairs aligned perfectly with the center pip of the ace of spades. 800 meters away, her finger moved to the trigger, applying pressure gradually and steadily. The rifle would fire at exactly the moment when her natural respiratory pause coincided with perfect sight alignment and optimal wind conditions. The sequence that followed took less than 3 seconds but felt like hours to everyone present. Maria's breathing stopped at the bottom of her exhale cycle. Her trigger finger applied steady rearward pressure. The rifle's firing pin struck the primer with mechanical precision, igniting the gunpowder and sending a bullet downrange at over 2,000 feet per second. The sound of the gunshot echoed across Fort Braxton, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of a supersonic projectile cutting through air. 400 pairs of eyes tracked an invisible bullet through its 800-meter flight path, knowing that the next few seconds would determine the outcome of a challenge that had captivated the entire military installation. 800 meters away, the ace of spades jerked slightly on its mounting board. For a moment, no one could determine what had happened. The distance made visual confirmation impossible with the naked eye, and official spotters needed several seconds to adjust their high-powered scopes for accurate assessment. Master Sergeant Williams, the range's senior instructor and most experienced spotter, was the first to make visual contact with the target. His 40 years of military service included combat deployments, where split-second target assessment could mean the difference between life and death. His voice carried clearly across the silent shooting range as he made his official call. Target hit. Dead center of the pip. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds before erupting into the loudest cheer in Fort Braxton's history. 400 voices combined into a roar of celebration that could be heard across the entire military installation. Soldiers who had maintained military bearing throughout the morning began applauding, whistling, and shouting congratulations. General Matthews stood frozen behind Maria's position, his weathered face showing the first genuine surprise he had experienced in years. Through his own binoculars, he could see the playing card with a bullet hole precisely through the center of the ace of spades' middle pip. The shot had been perfect. Not just accurate enough to meet the challenge's requirements, but technically flawless. Maria remained in her shooting position for several seconds, her breathing gradually returning to normal as the reality of her achievement settled in. She had made the most important shot of her life under conditions that would have challenged Olympic shooters, and she had done it with hundreds of people watching and her entire career hanging in the balance. As she finally stood and safed her weapon, the crowd's celebration continued unabated. Soldiers who had been skeptical of her abilities approached to offer congratulations and respect. Even those who had initially supported General Matthews' position found themselves impressed by a demonstration of skill that transcended questions of gender or military politics. Captain Stevens reached Maria first, his relief and pride evident as he shook her hand and offered his congratulations. He had known she was capable of exceptional shooting, but even he had harbored doubts about whether anyone could perform under such extreme pressure. Her success vindicated not just her own abilities, but his judgment in supporting her advancement. The official verification process took another 10 minutes, as range personnel confirmed the exact bullet placement and documented the results according to military standards. High-resolution photographs were taken from multiple angles, measurements were recorded, and witness statements were collected from certified range officials. General Matthews approached Maria as the verification process concluded. His stride remained confident, but his expression had changed fundamentally. The certainty that had characterized his demeanor throughout the challenge had been replaced by something approaching admiration. He stopped directly in front of her and extended his hand in a gesture that surprised everyone present. His words were simple but carried enormous weight given their source and the circumstances. "Sergeant Rodriguez, that was the finest demonstration of marksmanship under pressure I have witnessed in 30 years of military service. You have earned my respect and my recommendation for immediate advancement to Special Operations training." The handshake that followed represented more than just acknowledgement of a successful shot. It symbolized a bridge between military traditions and evolving realities, between skepticism and proven capability, between assumptions and evidence. General Matthews had built his career on decisive judgment, and his ability to acknowledge when his initial assessment had been wrong demonstrated the leadership qualities that had earned his rank. News of Maria's achievement spread throughout the military community within hours. The story of the impossible shot became legendary, shared in military training facilities across the country, as an example of what could be accomplished through skill, determination, and grace under pressure. The playing card with its precise bullet hole was preserved and eventually displayed in the base museum. More importantly, the challenge and its outcome influenced military policy discussions at the highest levels. Maria's success provided concrete evidence that capability could not be predicted based on gender or traditional assumptions. Her achievement helped open doors for other women seeking opportunities in special operations and combat roles. General Matthews proved true to his word, providing an official recommendation that described Maria's performance as exceptional and noting that her demonstration of skill under extreme pressure indicated strong potential for special operations assignments. His report to the Pentagon became a case study in objective performance evaluation and merit-based advancement. Maria Rodriguez went on to complete special operations training with distinction, eventually serving in multiple combat deployments, where her marksmanship skills saved lives and completed critical missions. Her success paved the way for other women in similar roles and demonstrated that the most important qualifications for military service were competence, dedication, and the ability to perform when performance mattered most. Years later, when Maria had achieved the rank of major and was training the next generation of military snipers, she would often tell her students about the morning when she faced 800 meters, impossible wind conditions, and the weight of everyone's expectations. But her primary lesson was never about the technical aspects of the shot itself. Instead, she taught them what her grandfather Eduardo had taught her: that the most important battles are fought in your mind before you ever touch the trigger, that respect must be earned through performance rather than demanded through argument, and that sometimes the most impossible shots are possible when you have the courage to take them. The ace of spades, with its perfect bullet hole through the center pip, remained on display at Fort Braxton as a reminder that assumptions about human capability are often proven wrong when someone has the skill and determination to prove them wrong. It became a symbol not just of exceptional marksmanship, but of what could be achieved when talent was given the opportunity to demonstrate itself, regardless of who possessed it.